Today, I would like to talk about the foundation of awakening. And what do I mean by that? As you know, I'm often a guide to the dying. I'm a meditation teacher. I have private clients. I lead groups. And almost always, when people come to me, they say things like, I want to be more loving. I want to die consciously. I want to deepen my devotion. I want to deepen my meditation. And yet, almost everyone that comes is bringing a big bag of fear, guilt, or shame, or all of the above on their back. For almost everyone, the heart is unstable. And certainly right now, if we look around the world, Middle East, Ukraine, Washington, D.C., our own neighborhood, there is so much instability. And it's so easy to be reactive to the uncertainty that's so obvious and prevalent in the world right now. Fear, guilt, and shame are the demons or the enemies of the first, second, and third chakras, respectively. And until we have worked with those emotions in a very direct way, it is really impossible for the heart to be open in a stable way. When you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling guilty, when you're feeling ashamed, the heart is not going to be very open, and it's not going to be open for very long at all. And certainly, we can talk about these emotions in their grosser, more obvious forms. But what I find is that they also arise in very subtle forms. For instance, when we talk about shame, I don't feel like I'm too much ashamed about what I do anymore. I don't feel guilty about what I do, ashamed of who I am. But at the same time, if I really look carefully and I think about the open heart and how I'm God and everybody's God, or I'm pure consciousness, I'm trusting my basic goodness, there are times when I don't do that. There's some sense of, am I really perfect in God's eyes? There's that wonderful little Hafiz poem, short Hafiz poem, where he says, in the eyes of your beloved, everything you ever do, think, or say is always, always beautiful. And being in India with Anandamai, who I was just talking about, being in India with Maharaji, they would look at me and they would see wholeness. And can I accept that in a moment-to-moment, be that in a moment-to-moment way, without denying my humanity? I'm not talking about some big rainbows and excitement thing here, but just in a very real way, very direct, intimate way. Can I accept my divinity? And there's this subtle sense of shame that I'm human, I'm fallible, and I buy into that as a way of denying that other place in myself. We've talked a lot about Tantra, about how every emotion is a healing message. It's all awakened energy. And really, that can't be experienced, that can't be lived until the heart is so open that there's this deep surrender, this dying, that self that could feel ashamed dies into love. So let's very briefly look at how we can use our relationships with fear, guilt, and shame to stabilize and deepen an open heart. I know it's a lot more fun to just, let's talk about devotion, let's talk about non-duality, let's rest in spaciousness. But when you're meditating, when you're having a simple moment in your life where you're not talking to somebody, you're looking at a screen, how often is the mind relaxed, simple and easy, open? And how often is there this distracted, automatic thinking going on as a way of avoiding these subtle feelings. So, first step, even before we deal with the fear, guilt, and shame, is motivation. We're asking ourselves to look at unpleasant emotions, right? And we'd rather, in some egocentric way, not do that. What does it feel like to be awake? What does it feel like to be asleep? How much of the day are you on autopilot? We're not saying here you have to meditate more or better or even meditate at all, but being present in this, once again, easy and simple way where we're not trying to suppress these feelings, we're not trying to push them away, not getting lost in them, but beginning to have a relationship with them. So, feeling this yearning, feeling this longing to be whole, to be open, feeling the longing, but not conceptualizing it, not thinking about it, but being with that longing to be connected. But imagine a hypothetical baby, maybe you, and what we're going to do here is talk very clearly about the parallels between stages of Buddhism, stages of early childhood development, and the awakening of the chakras. And the first chakra is about being grounded, the root chakra, the base of the torso. Being grounded means that there's a sense of trusting Mother with a capital M, trusting Mother Earth. It's the antidote to fear, it's the antidote to anxiety. And yet we often feel such a constant background anxiety that we don't even notice it. It's like the bass line in a quartet. You hear the melody, you hear the interesting changing part, and that background anxiety, we just begin to assume that's human nature. So from the middle of gestation to about 1 year old approximately, this little hypothetical person is learning to be grounded. And how much was their birth trauma, poor bonding with mother, neglect, illness, accident, all the things that happen, even if you had very loving parents, that one will feel it's not entirely safe to be here now. That grounding is about being physical, trusting being physical. I think about people in Tel Aviv and people in Tehran, but certainly there's plenty of reason to have our background anxiety resonated by the events of the day. Very seldom do people actually directly, nakedly feel fear and anxiety. That almost always, when they do become aware of it, they immediately go into fixating on the trigger, the story. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of them. I'm afraid of this situation. Instead of, what does it actually feel like? And very little information is in the spiritual literature, particularly the Eastern spiritual literature, about being grounded. It's just assumed that you are grounded because that's who wrote those books a long time ago. What does it feel like to be grounded? Just the word itself, right now. Is it possible to look at, is there some agitation, some excitement, some anxiety in the body, in the mind? And can you begin to feel that? Can that become a gateway into a deeper sense of settling in, settling down, accepting what this moment is? What are your involuntary thoughts about? Are they based on planning, taking care of yourself, worrying? And fear is at the bottom of all these other emotions, the fear, guilt, shame, anger, all the stuff that's arising. is based on fundamentally the sense of fear of what's out there. There's me and there's what's not me. And then people pile the guilt and the shame on top of that. So it's easier to work with the guilt and the shame than with the core fear. But we see the anxiety clearly when we watch the wandering mind. Okay, so right now, can you let your attention be in your body? And can you, as you breathe out, bring your attention down to the very root of your torso and imagine or visualize or feel that you can breathe out through the base of your torso into the earth it supports. Slightly emphasizing the exhalation, easy, natural inhalation, receiving, grounding, nurturing, supportive energy. And this is at first glance probably uncomfortable or self-conscious because we're used to identifying with I'm in the head. And as we begin the practice, it might start out as I am paying attention to down there, but begin to explore the possibility of not that objective I am paying attention or feeling or visualizing, but the subjective experience of having dropped down and feeling the support. That it's possible to hear what I'm saying, to collect anything that needs to be collected, and be grounded at the same time, to think about things, to be grounded at the same time. And I don't go around much in my life trying to be grounded, but I do try to notice when I feel particularly ungrounded, that something I'm getting too busy, there's too much time at the computer screen, I'm in a conversation with somebody that I'm getting lost in thought about it and dropping back down, trusting the feeling of being grounded. What does it feel like when you're grounded? Can you get familiar with this sense of support? My Guru Maharaj would say things like, don't be afraid of anything. God is always protecting us. Well, the Bible says the same thing. All the scriptures say something like that. They might not use the term God, but there's this sense of it's safe to trust this sense of support. And by safe, it doesn't mean you're not going to die. It doesn't mean accidents won't happen. But the sense of trust, of dropping down, of receiving the grounding energy, receiving the Divine Mother, moment to moment. Being on the spiritual path, looking at the things we're talking about, looking at today, tends to not only reveal, but even exacerbate a feeling of anxiety. And it might be that the more we do these practices that we're talking about today, the more anxious we're going to feel for a while because we're letting go of who we thought we were. We're not talking about being grounded as a way of pushing away the anxiety, but being able to be with just the way it is now. We tend as human beings to try to find a certainty, try to find a stable place, a stance from which to live our lives. And that place doesn't exist. That solid ground doesn't exist other than surrender into groundedness, surrender into trusting Earth element, Earth Mother, Divine Mother. Once again, a very short quote from Ernest Becker, who wrote The Denial of Death. The irony of our condition is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation, but it is life itself which awakens it. And so we must shrink from being fully alive. Life itself awakens the anxiety about death. So, is it possible that we can begin to have a relationship with the place in us that gets ungrounded again and again and again? That we can begin to acknowledge, even say, it's all right to be afraid, it's all right to be anxious, I'm here with you, it's okay, or at least have that feeling. To begin to notice the difference when we're acting from a motivation of fear or anxiety or acting from a motivation of openness and connectedness. Freud said that anxiety gets us to act. And yes, it does, but we can also act from being connected. So beginning to notice in a moment-to-moment way. And the more we do this, the more then the heart is going to feel safe to be vulnerable, regardless of what content is arising out there in here. And even beyond that, there is this possibility, which I really explore and think is a wonderful practice, of getting really quiet and being with the anxiety in the body. You're lying down, you're seated, and you're just beginning to feel the disorganized, anxious energy in the body and just not trying to fix it once again, just be with it, feel it as intimately as you can. And very often it can be a portal into deep, deep openness. It's like the anxiety are the tiny waves on the surface of an infinitely deep ocean. And we're always fixated on the tiny waves instead of all the treasures that are existing down in the depth of the ocean. Okay, so suppose then we've dealt to a certain extent with anxiety, with fear, either through feeling it or deepening our faith enough. When we were in India, RamDev had this saying, fear, comma, no faith, faith, comma, no fear. If we're lost in anxiety, we can do this more Buddhist thing that I've been talking about. You could also just deepen your faith. What do you have faith in? What do you invoke? The grounding part is somatic. The faith part is the heart, the spirit part. And in the mind, we can just reach out and ask to have that support and that connectedness. So then the second chakra, it's about being centered. Now it's not just about being physical, but it's about movement. This little child now at approximately the ages of 6 to 24 months old is learning that not only is it safe to be here, but in being here, I can move into the world and express myself and find pleasure. When our primary pleasures are when our primary pleasures are denied, secondary pleasures such as overeating, sexually acting out, addiction, drugs, avoiding responsibility tend to take over. The very basis of addiction. So that learning to be centered, learning to inhabit the second chakra, and as I'm talking, we can be doing this practice that instead of dropping down into the base the way we did with being grounded, it's dropping down into the lower belly, a few finger widths below the navel and in toward the middle of the body there. And once again, this might start out as I am objectively paying attention, visualizing, feeling what's going on down there in this part of my body. And that might be the way we have to start. But is it possible then to once again go beyond that into a subjective experiencing of what it feels like to be centered? Being centered is the antidote to swings between excess and deficiency. For example, between fasting and overeating, or trying too hard and not trying at all. So, from where do you feel your personal power emanating? Where do you first feel emotion? Healing the second chakra is moving toward the center again and again and again. And being centered, the Japanese call it the heart, which literally means sea of chi, that all of the energy in the universe is available to flow through us and uh, be able to be manifested by inhabiting the second chakra. If you're getting tired, if you're being overwhelmed by life, it's probably not life itself, but our reactions to it. Whether you're sick, whether you're well, whether you're busy, whether you're not, there is all this energy that's available. Is it us acting or is it God acting through us, which is basically the message of the Bhagavad Gita? We do what we do, but we let go of the fruits of the actions. We realize that we're only a conduit for this process to happen. And I find that if I can be centered as I'm interacting with people virtually and in person, that my heart then tends to open in a rather natural way. If I'm trying to focus on my heart and I'm not grounded and centered, then I tend to get lost in emotions much more readily. Being centered as well as being grounded is not just I'm doing something, but it's receiving the energy, the grounding energy, the centering energy that's always available. So being centered is learning to allow our natural, intuitive power to flow through and to create out into the world. And it's the sense of I deserve and enjoy pleasure. I enjoy movement. It's not necessarily I'm a Zen student being really quiet and just inhabiting my belly. It's the process of letting the energy flow through. And then finally, there's the third chakra. I mean, obviously, there's beyond that, but that's all we're going to be talking about today. The first and second chakras are largely unconscious. They're going from mid gestation to 2 years old. The third chakra is about a year and a half to about 4 years old. And it's the beginning of being conscious, it's the beginning of ego development. So not only is the person feeling safe in being here now and comfortable and supported and moving into the world and enjoying and creating, but there's an I who's beginning to do it. This is about power, will, autonomy, self-esteem. And the demon here is shame or its opposite, grandiosity. They're both the result of contempt, right? And I was talking before about this very subtle shame. Even if you're not somebody who has a lot of shame-based personality structure, that do you fully admit that you are the full expression of the divine, just the way you are, that you're perfect exactly the way you are, not that there's not room for self-improvement? Okay, so I have met some of these, not these enlightened people, but these really evolved devotees who have been spending a lot of time doing practice. K.K. Shah, Mr. Tiwari, Dada Mukherjee, Gurudat Sharma, people I knew in India. they didn't have that shame at all. They were comfortable in being love. I'm not saying they were fully enlightened beings. Maybe some of them were. That's a discussion for another time. But having no shame at all, imagine what that would be like. So the demon of the second chakra, I don't remember if we went into that deeply enough, is guilt about what you're doing. This is shame about who you are. And the third chakra, shame, is difficult because we live in a third chakra society. We live in a society where power is out of balance. When we look at how people deal with power, who have power, politicians, we won't name any names here, but on both sides of the aisle, when we look at the politicians in Israel and Tehran and Russia and United States, it seems like everybody is lost in power needs rather than what is the compassionate thing to do or say. There's this wonderful quote that I came across online a few months ago. When you worship power, compassion and mercy will look like sins. So how many politicians now are talking about compassion and mercy? Nobody's talking about that. We have to be the ones that start not only talking about it, but being that. What does it feel like to be without shame? What does it feel like to allow all this power to be freely available? The idea of power is difficult for many people to accept. And many people feel powerless and idolize the seemingly powerful, also in the spiritual world. And imbalance in the third chakra is what directly blocks the open heart. If we have no shame, then the heart feels free to be the love that it is. So it's using the power, not my power. And the popular model of power is power over. It's based on struggle and opposition. And the power over model even extends to our internal, the relationship with ourselves, trying to defeat parts of ourselves. When we see power as external, we tend to seek stimulation. We've lost our connection with who we are, the power that flows through us. And a sense of this inner power is essential to awakening, giving us the confidence to explore what's difficult, what's dark, what's unfamiliar. So can we invoke this will? Can we invoke it rather than trying to force it to happen? Maharaja said, I don't do anything. God does it all. Trust in God and you will have no fear. So we can say the slogan of the third chakra is, I will do, I will go, I will. When we drop into the third chakra, there's willed activity, ego strength, self-esteem, and then we have a very different relationship with power. It allows us to handle whatever comes our way over and over again. To the extent that we were over and under stimulated as a child, there tends to be an excess or deficiency in the third chakra. If there's an excess, it needs to be dissipated by going into the heart or going into the second chakra. If there's a deficiency, we need to move into the world. Okay. And without going into this too deeply, there is this psychological quality, the superego, particularly the punitive superego, the part of us that judges. And we tend to turn this on ourselves, the punitive superego. We turn it on other people all the time. It completely cuts through this power that's available. And people who have power needs, politicians, often don't have this foundation of inhabiting the third chakra, and they really are completely out of touch with the workings of the superego. So as I'm talking right now, are you grounded? Are you centered? So finally, going beyond battling with parts of ourselves, which leads to fragmentation usually rather than wholeness, we have to change the way we think about power. To channel and contain the power is the challenge of the third chakra and gives our life purpose. So it's still not about connecting. It's still not about love. It's about duality, but emphasizes trusting the power, trusting the chi, trusting the Shakti in the world, going beyond shame into self-esteem. And a lot of Buddhism is really based on the notion that we all have a basic goodness, a basic wholeness. It's always there. Enlightenment is not about creating or finding something new, but it's about letting go of our mistaken notions, letting the veils fall away, and realizing that all along we have been whole without denying our, our quirky humanity. And to the extent we do this, then we can go into the heart. We can start connecting with love, with compassion, and we can have a whole discussion then about the open heart. Okay, so let me stop there. And I always say, let me stop there. And then I want to say 2 or 3 more things. It's a bad habit I have, but here I go. And I've been meditating for 50 plus years. And a lot of the times I'm just hanging out in spaciousness. Just shortly before we had this meeting, I lit some incense and waved it around my room. And there's Chinrezi, and there's Maharaji, and Hanuman, and Durga, and Christ, and Shiva, and Vajrasattva, and all these different beings. And as I'm waving the incense, sometimes I feel really connected. Sometimes I feel that these aren't just pictures or statues, but they're actually deities. But today I was just feeling totally empty. I wasn't feeling love, but maybe it was a deeper love. It's not like I'm loving God. It's just like this feeling of devotion. Okay. And that requires a sense of being inhabiting these lower chakras. I find for a lot of my life that it's just resting in openness. And what I notice, I'm not then going back and what do I need to become present again? What do I need to do to get grounded and centered? Just take a few breaths. Maybe it takes 5 seconds. Maybe it takes 5 minutes. So let's open this up to discussion. And I would really encourage people as much as possible when you're asking or talking, can you be grounded and centered? Can you not let the intellectual story about what you're feeling and what you are trying to express get in the way of being present? These things I'm talking about are maybe not too difficult when we're sitting quietly in front of the puja table or walking out in nature. But right now, with all these ideas floating around, can this discussion be part of what it is that we're talking about?
Thank you for the talk, as always. I always appreciate it when you encourage the kind of somatic response as a way of accessing our deeper states or accessing reality, because I think it's so easy for us to lie to ourselves or delude ourselves, but the body kind of tells it like it is. One thing I've noticed, though, with my practice of going into starting with the body, which is a lot of my practice, you talked a lot about faith, and it requires, I think, a certain kind of faith to overcome the fear, to actually feel the fear. You know what I mean? It's like just allowing yourself to feel those emotions that we tend to naturally push away anyway. But there's a kind of fearfulness about, like, am I going to be okay to feel this? And that to me is kind of an act of faith. Whenever I'm able to do that, it's always of great benefit, because then it actually starts to ease and allow me to go deeper. But it's just overcoming that initial stage that I found pretty interesting. And I have to kind of talk myself into it and remind myself, it's okay. It's okay to sit here or lie here and, feel this and see where it leads me. So that's all I have for today.
There is this natural tendency to, at least with certain emotions, and the ones for you might not be the ones for me, the feeling that if I go into this, I might get lost and never come back. It's like a black hole. I go into that beyond the event horizon and I'm gone in there forever. And there's a fear about that surrender, that letting go. So that whether you're working with shame or guilt or anger, underneath it, there is this anxiety about becoming nobody. And dealing with this fundamental anxiety that we started out talking about, first chakra stuff, is really the gateway to freedom. If you hope to live consciously, if you hope to die consciously, if you hope to trust the surrender into the heart, and beyond that, the surrender into non-duality, that basic anxiety that there's an I who needs to be protected and solidified and reified, that has to be dealt with. And it's fundamental, because that self doesn't exist in the way that we popularly think about it. I'm not saying that you aren't you and I'm not me, but that the solid, ongoing, separate, permanent self doesn't exist in that way. So that the self is the ego structure is in a very difficult position. It doesn't really exist except as a verb, and spiritual practice is designed to disidentify with it. So it's got a double problem and creates all this anxiety all the time.
I have a question. I've not been good at feeling my feelings. Most of my life wasn't connected to the lower chakras. But since a divorce about a decade ago, my body would just quake a lot. Like I would wake up quaking, or I would go to bed quaking. And so I guess my question is, that's just one example of it. Felt like even though I wasn't consciously saying this is an incident and this is the fear or whatever, my body was just feeling fear, but I was not in control of it. Does that make sense? And
Sure.
I just wondered about what you described today was us kind of, I didn't know if what you were suggesting is that we needed to understand and go into the fear, or can I just accept? I do feel better after 7 years of quaking now, and I don't quake so much anymore. Did my body kind of do the work for me unconsciously?
Right. So you said, do I need to, thank you. You said, do I need to understand and go into the fear? And I think you need to go into the fear, but not necessarily understand it. So like understanding, it would be like, I'm feeling fear because I'm divorced, and who's going to take care of me, and on and on. And the narrative leads to another narrative. And then 2 years later, you're whatever's going on. So it's trusting this naked, direct interface, this meeting with emotion, and as you suggest, in the body. And it might be that the quaking isn't a negative thing. I've been doing body work lately, and sometimes when I'm really relaxed and lying down and I just take a really long out breath, my belly starts shaking a little bit as it's releasing the tension of the day or something like that. So, in fact, there's a whole healing modality called TRE, trauma release, something or another. I don't quite remember what it stands for, where they actually try to encourage the shaking, because the shaking is the letting go of bottled up energy. And without pointing a finger at you, it's very easy to begin to judge, is what I'm feeling good or is it bad? Is it leading to healing? Is it leading to not healing? And beginning to trust, okay, I'm shaking now.
Yeah.
And let me be with that. I don't have to understand it, but my body is doing this. And can I be fully present for this in this moment of aliveness?
Thank you. I have actually done that. I've turned around, and sometimes when I quake, I'm like, thank you, body. Thank you for what you're doing. Whereas I used to think, oh, what's going on? So I've kind of evolved there. But I just wonder if I'm missing a piece of, how, anyways, I think I'm clear. I just, sometimes people can express so clearly the emotion that they went under to have this epiphany. And I'm not quite there yet. I can't say it was this exact childhood incident that I went beyond that inner child and I received this. I'm not that aware of the details of my inner workings, if that makes sense.
It does, but once again, you're going back to thinking that you need to understand something.
Yes.
That the mind needs to have a solid place to stand and understand what you're experiencing, so it's known. Krishnamurti wrote a book called Freedom from the Known. I thought didn't read the book, but it was a great title, right? So is it possible to feel what you're feeling and not need to go back to, well, this happened when I was 3 years old when my mother was too busy and whether, something happened like that, or my dad did that, something. I mean, certainly some of that is useful. If you have major stuff from childhood, being in therapy, of course, is very useful. But eventually, I mean, I remember when I was in therapy and then I stopped being in therapy and I felt like, what a relief. I'm not thinking of what I'm going to be bringing my therapist next week and all that, how I'm trying to connect this with my mother and all those things like that. And a person I know who's a therapist said, if it's not one thing, it's your mother.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you have deep trauma in the past, it might be a whole different discussion and you would need some support to work through these things. But eventually, to begin to notice the ego's tendency and deep need to ascribe meaning and try to find understanding and package experience into these compartments that has to do with psychoanalytic understanding.
Thank you.
There's some wonderful books by John Wellwood about the interface between psychotherapy and spirituality, where he talks about how they can support each other. And the other thing I'd like to mention is that there is a book called Eastern Body, Western Mind by Anodea Judith, where she talks about these chakras in a very sophisticated way. A lot of the material is my own. A few things I said I lifted from her, and it's one of my favorite books.